Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is subscriber submitted, sent in by my subscriber Phil Stern. Phil had this encounter in July last year, and I know it's very fresh in his memory still. Some of you guys and girls may have heard of this encounter through Vic Cundiff's show last week featuring Josh Turner. Huge respect to both those guys. As you already know, I'm a huge fan of Vic Cundiff's show and also Josh Turner's work. Thank you ever so much for bringing this to attention, guys. Phil actually contacted me just before that show went out, a few days beforehand, saying that he'd like me to narrate the story, which of course I feel very honoured to do so. Really interesting encounter here, people. I'm sure you will agree. It's actually my first encounter on international waters, not an encounter that took place on US soil or British soil. This actually took place over in Norway, so quite a rare find there, I think, guys, and I'm very intrigued to see what more I can dig up about the folklore of Norway in regards to possible lichens or Dogman type creatures. Of course, please do let me know what you think down below. Please do like and share. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The Cabin by the Lake. Let's get straight into that. Hey DMT, I'm going to give you the info on my encounter in July of last year. I went up to southern Norway where I have a little holiday cabin. The cabin is situated out and above the little town of Evje, approximately 65 kilometers from the port of Kristiansand to the north. To get to the cabin, you have to drive up from Evje on a paved road which takes you up and into the hills. You pass lakes on the way and a handful of houses, and lots of forest and water runs through. My cabin is on the very end of that area, approximately 16 kilometers into the wild, besides one other cabin that is situated 500 meters away and only occupied from time to time. I am all by myself out there. My cabin is above a small lake resting on a slope. On the third day of my arrival, I went outside of the cabin's deck to have a cigarette. It was about 10 p.m. and still very light outside, because in the summer months the sun never really goes down. Just then I heard noises, water splashing and grunts coming from the lake below. The shore is a good 30 meters from the deck to the cabin. As I walked up to the edge of the deck to see what it was, because it was really freaking me out, that's when I looked down to the shore. I saw a hunched over, hairy creature. It was trying to pull a dead moose onto the shore by the neck. The thing turned around and has apparently noticed me standing there looking at it. It had swung its head around violently, giving me a grim look, a grim kind of look, turned its head back to me, and it was casually running away into the bushes. The creature was about man size, 180 centimeters or so. Weight, well, I would guess at no more than 250 pounds. Had a protruding snout like a wolf's, upright ears, not too big, and it was covered in a tuft like black and brown hair. Arms and legs were normal size. Legs, though, were straight, and the overall appearance was pretty slim-bodied. I immediately went back inside the cabin, panicked, and locked and barricaded the back door and back windows. I went for an axe that I keep in a utility room by the front door, sat down in a chair by the back door. Lights off. Only the oven and fireplace was lit. I could not believe and make out what it was, and I freaked even more realising that far down south in Norway, there were basically no wolves nor bears. 10 minutes in, I heard the most radical howls I have ever come by. They sounded mad, I mean crazed in a way. I did not even try to get to the car, which, I might add, was right out front, close to the main entrance of the cabin. I was petrified, and could not shut one eye the whole night. The howls and the commotion outside in the bushes went on pretty much all night long. Next day, I carefully left the cabin and went for my car to head into town. Problem is, I have no internet or any connection out there. I went straight to the police station to file a report on what I saw. The officials told me it must have been a big dog trying to put me off. They did not laugh, as I had expected. They did not look me in the eyes either, and started talking to each other in Norwegian. They looked each other in the eyes, however, seeming to be a bit nervous. I was complimented outside because I was getting pissed at being put off like that. I received no copy of the report or anything at all. The last few days of my stay, nothing else happened except that the carcass of the moose was picked up by someone or something. Nothing left at the scene. I checked with the local and asked him if there were any bears or wolves that far south, just to confirm what I already knew. Of course, he replied, no. Besides all that, I forgot to mention that the creature casually went off running on 2 legs. To this day, even though it has gotten better, I feel paranoid, even around familiar places like my house, yard and whatnot. Only in these groups have I found a little peace, and listening of course to Vic's show, which I found out about when I was researching online after my encounter. Back before all of this happened, I was the type of person that would, laugh at the thought of these cryptids and whatnot. I was totally thrown off the plate, thinking that I'm going mad, to question my sanity, and to this day, I have a hard time believing any of it myself. Honestly, I don't want to. Regards, Phil.
Dogman in Alberta. Let's get straight into that. Hi DMT, I've got a encounter I think you might like. Here goes. I reported this to the North American Dogman project a few months ago, but I think it's something that you may like as well. For the record, I am retired from full military career with some overseas experience. No combat, but peacekeeping included. I am an avid hunter, although this episode really cut down on my solo hunting. I used to deer hunt a lot, and in later years this devolved into much grouse and rabbit hunting. Pretty much addicted to rabbit hunting, and I became very good at it, identifying great rabbit hotspots. I used to carry just a .22 rimfire rifle and minimal equipment so I could cover much terrain in just one day. But my favourite afternoon and early evening hunts, I started to encounter wolves and black bears much too often. A puny .22 was not sufficient protection, so a shotgun became preferred armament. Keep in mind, I was most often alone. This latest wonderful hunting spot was on the very edge of oil exploration territory, so there were survey trails, and they are just great pathways into this area. This particular east-west trail has several resident predators. One owl and a turkey vulture were often nearby or overhead at all times. The turkey vultures are recent residents here in northeastern Alberta, but this is well known by locals, so no one questions vulture appearances. But one unusual sound I heard at least twice and could never identify the source was a constant coughing sound, like a cat coughing up a furball but at higher volume. Strangely, it never changed in pitch or volume, and one could say it sounded like a recording of this sound, but over and over and over being repeated. I found this very strange indeed. It only happened at this particular locale before or since. I believe twice, meaning at least one other hunting trip, this strange coughing sound was heard, but the animal source never identified. Anyways, I was on a late afternoon hunt walking away to the east from my parked truck on the main road north and south. As I came near to a junction of two trails, I plainly heard some medium-sized animal off to my right along the south side of this trail. In the dusky light, I decided to sit on a large rock, and placing my trusty shotgun across my lap, I sat down facing the critter that now began to circle me. I assumed it was moving around me in an attempt to catch my scent. And then, there it was. I caught sight of this animal as it stepped behind a tree. I could see its rear legs and flank. Its rear legs had hocks just like a canine. As it rounded the tree, I could not identify exactly what it was, and I have never ever seen a canine like this before or since in the wilderness. Its front legs were longer than its back legs. Kind of odd. Its hair around the canine-like muzzle was long and scruffy looking. It looked like the incisor teeth were extremely long. It also had a muzzle like a dog. It had two upright ears like a dog, but I could see pointed, tufted hairs extending just a little bit past the pointed ears. This is kind of murky in my memory, but I think it had yellowish coloured eyes that stared very intently at me. I felt that something very odd was going on some kind of mental level. Best I can describe, I was being evaluated by this on four legs beast, as if it was measuring my willingness to stand my ground or otherwise. An odd sensation overcame me, indeed. I've never felt this way before or since, and its back and chest seemed overly muscular for a wolf. The coat colour was reddish along the back, and then maybe yellowish tones patched also on the back. Overall, it was kind of a greyish coat. This is very hard to describe with accuracy due to the rapidly fading light conditions, and soon it will be dark to be in the forest. Soon it will be too dark to be in the forest. Well, I could not decide right there and then whether to shoot it or not, but I had my over-under shotgun at the shoulder just in case it attacked me, because we were literally only 15 meters apart right then. I decided I should not shoot because I could not identify this creature, but it did look closest in my mind to the shape of only an African hyena, in my opinion, which is really weird for Alberta. I left heading towards my truck, but very often stopping and then turning with the gun at shoulder just in case. This happened about 3 years ago, and I have only told 3 people until very, very recently. 2 close friends of mine and 1 family member. The negative reaction from 1 friend tempered my desire to tell more people about this very odd encounter. And I must repeat that at no time was this strange dog-like creature walking upright on its hind legs. Did I have fear? Yeah, but I was the one with the reliable shotgun and lots of ammo, so I felt that this was sufficient self-protection if things did go south. I never seen it again, but I must say I've never returned to that same spot. This could change as 3 close friends have been bothering me to return there. Of course, we will all be armed and looking to fill our larders with small game. This DMT, I swear to be a truthful story. Sincerely, Anonymous.
Of course, a huge thank you to my subscriber for sending this in. He does want to remain anonymous, and as I've said before, that's not a problem. We don't judge here. We are only here to be the voice of all of you out there that have these strange experiences and encounters. So please do feel free to get in contact with myself. You can do by email, of course, or by any of the links in the description. My email, of course, is deadmantalking666@gmail.com. I hope you guys enjoy this. Please do let me know down below. Of course, please do like and share. And without further ado, let's get into tonight's story that I'd like to entitle From Tuscan to Phoenix and the Skinwalker Pack. Let's get straight into that. Greetings, DMT. To get right to it, I've been a subscriber for some time now on YouTube. A family relative shared your channel to me, and for the past few weeks we've been discussing on an encounter that I had last year. So I'm emailing you my encounter. I was asked to leave out names of roads, of course names and exact location for privacy reasons, but I hope you guys enjoy it. Here you go. Time 2000 hours, October 16. Before I get to the encounter, I want to rewind it back to give an idea of the scenario. It was summer of 2016, and after splitting up with my then girlfriend of 2 years, I decided to plan a trip across country on my motorcycle. My ride would take me from Georgia to Arizona, where family lives. So, fast forward a few months after saving up some money for the trip, I was on my way to Arizona. Just me, my motorcycle, and some extra belongings like clothes, a sleeping backpack, and as well as my Glock 22 sidearm, along with some extra ammo and magazines. Growing up in the mountains of Georgia, I grew to love guns over the years and have a large collection over time, as well as an active hunter, so I'm very comfortable with guns, hunting, outdoors, and just generally being in the woods. The trip went better than expected. I saw so many new places, I met so many new people, as well as seeing my family. On this night, I was travelling from Tuscan to Phoenix. It had just started to get dark, and I have done this journey numerous times. For those of you who haven't been outside the city and have not experienced it, the roads and the surrounding area can of course be very dark. I mean pitch black dark. The only light you have is the headlights and of course the moon. I was about an hour into my ride to Phoenix and still had 2 more hours to go. There were a few cars passing by, but nothing new. I decided then to pull over to the side of the road for some time to rest and just take in the surrounding. So there I am, alone with my motorcycle turned off, and I'm now standing to the left of the road, just looking around and trying to take some pictures and take in the surroundings. On me, of course, I had my Glock 22 on my right side, so I was pretty comfortable with the area. For details, it was a 2-way highway. To my left, there was large boulders that lead to the mountains in the distance, and to my right was open desert. I'm just wandering around, walking and taking in a few minutes before I got back on my bike to continue into the night. The night was a dry, cool night, and I started to pay attention. I realised that there was background noises. But these background noises were not normal, not the normal chirps of crickets, etc. Those noises had ceased to exist. No animals in the distance, no vehicles, not even the sound of wind, just my 2 steps that I make every few seconds. Deciding then to get back on my bike, a noise catches my attention, coming from behind me where the boulders are. I look towards where I believe it's coming from, trying to make sense of who or what it is. The area I was in is known for drug smuggling and trafficking, so my guess was that it was people in the distance just making their way. I slowly start taking steps to my bike, and it hits me. The noises, they were chattering, almost as if communicating to each other, but sounded off, as if they were really trying really hard to say what they were saying. I get on my bike and turn on the front lights and shine it towards where the noise was coming from. My believing at that time was that it was people that were lost. Instantly, the chattering comes to a stop the moment that I did this. I'm trying to see as far as I can when the chattering comes from behind me now. There must be a group of them, I told myself. Then, from in front again. Coyotes. It must be coyotes. They tend to distract you while the alpha sneaks up from behind. I draw my pistol, I take it off safety, and grab the extra ammo and magazines in my bag and put them in my pockets. I then take a few steps forward and I see movement to the left and then centre, then the right, and in quick movement trying to counter. I go right to meet a boulder. This is what I saw. As I dive right to meet the boulder, I see two amber lights just a few feet above me, as if whatever this thing was, it was peeking over the boulder down at me. That's right, down at me. I remember the taste of blood in my mouth. The smell of blood, feces and urine was overpowering. Adrenaline rushes so fast in the human body that your mind can't keep up with it till days after the scenario. This coyote, or whatever this was, began to make noises, the very same noises that were the chattering that I heard moments before. This is what was making or mimicking the chattering. The quick rush of blood and adrenaline, I raised my gun and fired. I unload my magazine and reload a new one, unload that one and load my final magazine. The yell that this animal gave was the same as when you shoot large animal game. It takes off to my left, with the last few rounds I have following it behind. Wasting no time, I step backwards towards my bike, keeping my eyes to the direction it was in. I hop on and took off the opposite way it went, to only realise when I saw a major road sign that I was going back to the Tuscan area I had originally left. Safe to say, I made it to my younger brother's house around midnight, to him greeting me with pure and utter confusion of being back. Shaken up and trying to make sense and play back what just happened, I didn't realise that his wife and kids are outside also trying to figure out what's going on. My brother walks me inside and sits me down along with his wife. I explain what happened, and his wife is completely white and has a concerned look on her face. My brother's wife is of Navajo descent, and her grandfather is a shaman for the local reservation, which she told me after I explained what I saw. She goes to tell me about Skinwalkers and the history about them in the surrounding areas and the tribe, and tells me she will contact her grandfather first thing in the morning. The following morning he shows up along with another guy, and I explain to them the encounter. For their privacy, the tribe, and for the sake of drawing a crowd to seeking or exploring or trying to find out, I was asked not to share what they did to help me and the ritual that took place. The ritual that will ward off bad spirits. In the following weeks, and playing this encounter over and over in my head, remembering details, I started to do research and found out similar encounters all over the world. I tried to ignore the paranormal for the longest time, until this. I met a handful of people that explained to me as being hunters. I share this with you to let people know to always be aware and pay attention to details around you, and of course keep yourself protected. 3 glowing eyes in the tree line. Let's get straight into that. Hi DMT, I have debated for quite some time as to whether I should contact you or not. Well, I believe that time has come, my friend. I am not your normal Dogman encounter. I have studied these creatures for a very long time, and even tracked one pack clear from where I live, all the way down to eastern Tennessee. I also tracked a pack of 12 plus dogmen all the way to the Adirondack forest, but I had to retreat from my campaign as my hunting companion almost became their next dinner guest. That particular pack, and I do not say things like this lightly, that particular pack are no doubt man-eaters. I have found mounds of evidence of this as compared to other packs which live, of course, off the deer of the land. I have also kept track of the whitetail populations in certain regions and have found over the last 5 years they have exponentially dwindled in numbers, forcing their remaining to migrate further and further south for the most part. I'm sorry, I have swayed away off point. You want to get to the story? Well, here it goes. Okay. This took a lot of courage because I've been ridiculed so much for what happened to me. My grandfather owned a cabin. I'm not disclosing the location of it due to the fact that I don't want anything to happen to anyone. Anyway, my grandfather's cabin was his way of getting the family together for the holidays, so he could have a nice Sunday dinner with all of us. One day, all of a sudden, that all stopped abruptly. He wouldn't allow anyone but himself to visit the cabin. We all looked forward to going over there and cherished it for a very long time. For years I would ask him why he was doing that. He never told me why, but when he passed, he left the cabin in place to me. I inherited the cabin of my childhood and was ecstatic about that. And it was soon after that I realised why he did what he did. I would go out and walk in the woods on game trails which are everywhere. I know these woods like I know my own home, so I never had any reason to fear them. It was on one of these walks that I encountered what people call dogmen. I was walking just like any other time. Nothing was different. It was then, one of these game trails, I noticed an offshoot, a sort of small trail that went only 6, possibly 7 feet back. I could see that something had bedded down there. I thought it was a deer. I then walked in the bedded area. I soon realised that this was an ambush point for whatever made this bedded area, and it was massive. My arm hairs stood erect and chill literally ran down my spine. I felt as if I was being watched from different vantage points. Since it was night time, I had a tracking flashlight and my sidearm, the latter of which I drew and kept at the ready. I genuinely feared for my life at this point. All of a sudden, an ungodly growl was made to my right, about 10 to 15 yards from me, very close indeed. I pissed myself. It was so terrifying. I didn't immediately run, fearing that whatever it was might take me as threatening. I turned and started heading back on the main trail, and when I was about 5 minutes from the back door of my cabin, this thing let out a howl that I swear felt like it went right through my body. I then proceeded to run, and as soon as I did, this thing was chasing me. For every 5 steps that I took, this thing was taking 1. That's how fast this dogman was. I heard the sounds of branches being ripped off trees, and I could have sworn I felt the vibrations of it running after me. I barely made it to my cabin and slammed the door shut, locking the 2 deadbolts and the chain lock. I then turned on my spotlight and shined it into the tree line. There, at the tree line, were 3 sets of eyes that shined vivid yellow with enormous black pupils. I felt as if the thing could read my mind, Well, I'm not sure if it could. All I know is that I'm alive and have since heard them many times, but I don't take night hikes anymore and haven't for years. The very next morning, I set out to see just exactly how many there truly were. As I had such an adrenaline rush from going from the night before, I thought I had miscounted in my hyper state. No, I was right to come find out. There were 3 separate tracks, all the same but different in size. I truly believe that there were 2, not juvenile but adolescent dogmen and a beta wolf teaching them to hunt and track. I'm not sure about tracking humans now, but I know they used me as practice for them, because if they wanted to kill me easily, they easily could have done so. I should tell you, when you encounter one dogman and you think it's just you and him, you are wrong. Do not ever underestimate these creatures. They are smart, tactical, and vicious. When you see one, that means there are at least 2 more that you can't see, but they can see you. They never travel or hunt alone. It may seem like it, but that's what they want you to think. They think like a man, not like an animal. I have more to share, but for now, I will leave you with this.
Without further ado, let's get into part 2 of John's encounters with the Dogman. Let's get straight into that. Hi DMT. Well, here is chapter 2, as I promised you, my friend. I haven't been able to reply like this, like I normally do, as I was in Athens, Ohio, following up on a barrage of sightings that are coming out of this place. One of the main reasons I do what I do, and I can speak for the rest of my order, as well as seeing, is that I founded it. We do this not for the fame, or just to say that we've seen these, or seen that. These creatures are a part of our history, just like the rest are. The first documented case of Dogman was in 1887 AD, which even to this day, most of these sightings and encounters happen in the northwestern quadrant of the Lower Peninsula. And I should clarify, that is just the first documented case. I myself believe these creatures have roamed the forests for hundreds of years, and I am still trying to understand how they age, and of course, if they die, or just become suspended at a certain age and stop aging altogether until they are killed, or however else they die, which, as I say, is still something I do not yet comprehend. The worst part about all of this is that local officials such as police captains, judges, forest service rangers and many more are covering up these fatal attacks and leaves no justice done, which can't really be done for the people that are affected. What are they going to do? Arrest the werewolf? No. I mean private justice. Back in the late 1980s at the Land Between the Lakes, as sure as you know, it was a brutal, fatal Dogman attack. This thing massacred an entire family, including an infant baby. The mother and father were found torn to pieces lying on the floor, and the only way they were able to identify them was through dental records. The daughter was found, draped over a branch, 9 feet up in a tree, with her entire bottom half missing and nowhere in sight. The infant child was gone and never to this day has been found. I called and called about this to the LBL and they deny it ever happened. They said they don't keep records of wolf attacks. Here is why they've made a grave mistake. I said to them, wolf attack. I've never said anything about a wolf attack, and by the way, I know what really happened. You needn't lie to me, Ranger. You and I both know what truly happened to this family, and many others you all cover up down there. They denied me any records to study, and they forever banned me from the place, as I've been down there several times, and was led away in cuffs the last time. So, I let that rest ever since, and have moved on. will now share with you the hunt that I swore I would never speak of again. But as I have stated many times, people do indeed need to know. This hunt involves an earlier hunt that 4 of us went on and prepared for 6 months of training and close combat, as well as long distance crossbow training. We did not use plain bolts because they are ineffective, and I've seen where people think that silver doesn't work. Well, let me clarify this for all of you. Dogmen have an accelerated healing. What I mean by this, that regular lead bullets do not work. I have tried, and I thought the silver was bullshit at one time as well. But indeed, it's the only way to disable their rapid regeneration and ultimately kill them. Now, the silver, it has to be pure 0.999 or 0.9999 Argentium pure to disable their defense. Their blood is of course unique as well as their entire system. When their blood binds with the pure silver, it weakens their ability to heal in general. This is the only way to kill them, to my knowledge, because normal bullets do not work. They just look at you like nothing and walk off. Doesn't affect them at all. Anyway, more on that later. After our training session for this campaign, as we always do, we met and went over all of the evidence all of us had collected about the Adirondacks forest. How many acres it was, where the streams and creek beds are, ravines, caves and open fields. This is all extremely necessary, as they already know every turn of the forest they dwell in. Our mission was to wipe out the entire 12 that my team members and I counted on a recon mission there. Now, there are a certain plant species that will mask your scent due to the fact that I have spoken with people that have had encounters being tracked to their own home, even as far as 3 to 4 miles away from their encounter site. That is some serious olfactory sense on these creatures. On the day of the hunt we arrived at the Adirondacks. We had selected a private site where we wouldn't be disturbed. We then proceeded to assemble our plan of attack and loaded our silver hollow points, silver tipped bolts dipped in colloidal argentum, which I synthesized myself and then triple distilled for highest purity content with pure silver shavings floating in the tincture. And, of course, a little hemlock. Being careful to wear gloves while applying the hemlock tincture, as this is of course a very poisonous plant and will cause respiratory depression quite fast. We also set some gut piles of some already field dressed deer from a couple of deer hunters so that these creatures will key to them. Now, it was time to begin. As I knew where their den resided, I didn't immediately go there, but I knew if my team members and I did, we would be massacred and at a disadvantage, having to take them all on at once instead of 2 or 3, which is still quite a challenge, I say. You remember what I said about them being tactical, and that's exactly what they are. They could use the same tactics, or they may have developed a new one from the last time that we done battle with them, and that's more than likely the case. So you have to anticipate that they will not be predictable. It was no more than 10 minutes, maybe that, we all heard the alpha's massive howl, alerting the others that someone was near and that someone was being us. That's when I seen we were at the advantage of that point. That howl meant they all weren't together as a pack. So my companion and I spotted two of them at one of the gut piles, feasting upon the trap that we had made for the exact reason. I fired my crossbow, sending 2 bolts through the head, which dropped him due to the tinctures. The second wolfman jumped 20 feet or so to my left and was anticipating that my partner was able to get a kill shot with his .44 Magnum revolver, with of course silver hollow points, and he blew his brains clean out. What he didn't anticipate was there was a third in the tree above, and it was on him in a matter of seconds, latched onto his arm, almost tearing it completely off. I quickly shot another 2 bolt directly into the head as I already reloaded my crossbow. This one was not going down without a fight. I ended up having to dispatch his head to kill him and keep my companion from being eaten alive. Though his arm was hanging on, we did not take him to the hospital, as we have our own special MD on staff. We cannot allow them to start asking question after question, you know. He survived, but only just. He is still recovering, and we all don't know if he will ever be able to hunt again. Most importantly, will the bite have an adverse effect on him? We quickly had to abandon our campaign, only able to take out 3 of this vicious man-eating pack. That is only to say we have since regrouped and headed back to the Forest of Death, which is what we call it now. That place is rife with human skulls, femurs, and everything you can think of. Some so bleached out and brittle that it's hard to tell how long these creatures have been killing humans and devouring them. I will soon send you the remaining chapter of this campaign. There are certain aspects we all have to discuss before disclosing them. Regards, John.
Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Before we start off, guys, I would just love to say thank you so much. The past 5 months of uploading have been incredible. I'm totally shocked and humbled. Truly am humbled by all of the support, the comments that you guys give me, the feedback, and telling me where I'm going wrong and where I'm going right. I really do appreciate it, every single one of yous. This week, guys, has been an absolutely tremendously cool week, really. I've spoke with some fantastic people, some peers, the likes of Jodie Cook, and just really networking with a lot of people behind the lines in terms of encounters, working through the day and night because of the time differences. It's not the easiest job, but I absolutely love it and I wouldn't change it at all. Tonight's encounter, guys, with the Dogman, I think you're going to absolutely love. I spoke with our encounter, Jeremy, and it's an absolute great guy, very honest, and you know, he really wanted to get his story over because he wants to, you know, hope encouraging that other people will come forward with their story and share their experience, and in some way hopefully help others like it already does. Without further ado, guys, let's get straight into that story that I'd like to entitle I Didn't Move Until It Snapped Its Jaws at Me. Let's get straight into that. Hi DMT. I had a scary encounter when I was around 8 or 9 and I haven't talked about it in a very long time. I'd like to share it with you and possibly share it with the group. Well, it was summer of 93 or 94, I think. My family were on a vacation in Smithsville, Tennessee. We had a family friend who lived there and we would camp out in front yard. By the way, my family are from Florida. So, the house we were staying was at up on a hill and there was wood surrounding everything. So one of the nights, my brothers and I, we went out front in a big tent, camping out, trying to catch fireflies and making s'mores. It was a really hot night. I remember no breeze at all. Nothing. You can just hear the insects and the fire we had going. When all of a sudden, it got extremely silent. Nothing around, not a sound. I remember one of my brothers saying he thinks he sees something in the tree line, which is probably a good 75 yards to the side of the house. It was around 8 p.m. and I didn't see anything at all. My brother was just said that it looked big. So, us being young, we all freaked out and ran straight inside to tell the adults. They, unfortunately, all laughed and just said we're trying to scare each other. The only person who believed us was an old man who my parents and their friends had just called Peeper. He was very tall, and I remember with a beard and ovals and a dirty hat. He always had a coffee cup in his hand. He was nice, but kind of scared me. Anyway, he said, y'all probably saw the big bear, as what he called it. Now, I don't know if bears are native to the area or not, but it scared us to that we wouldn't go back outside at night. Of course, the other adults said he's just trying to scare us, but I believe him. So, the next afternoon, my brothers and I wanted to go exploring in the woods around the house. I didn't want to go after hearing about the big bear, but I went anyway. So, I'm the youngest at the time, 8 or 9, when this happened. My 2 older brothers were 10 and 11. So we were pretty deep into the woods by now. Where in certain spots it was dark due to the trees overhead. We eventually found a dried up creek bed. We were collecting shells and other cool rocks when we realised it was getting late and it was getting dusk. Also, that it was silent, not a sound. If I had to guess, we were probably 200 yards from the house. So, right before we started heading back, we then heard what sounded like a growl, and then another growl. We were all freaked out. We looked the way the growl came from, and there were a couple of big trees next to each other. And to the side of one, we saw a big black figure. It had to have been at least 7 feet tall, staring at us from behind the tree. The scariest part, DMT, was its face. It didn't look like a bear or anything else, but a big wolf head. The ears were really big, and they kept twitching. One of my brothers said, "That's a big dog," but it's not. I was frozen in fear, complete and utter. It was just staring at us, and then its arm came up and grabbed the tree. It had hands, not paws, but big, hairy hands with long nails. At this time, my brother said run, and started to go. As I started to run, it stepped out from behind the tree, and it had this menacing smile on its face. I almost couldn't move till it snapped its jaws at me. We all ran as fast as we could till we got home. We were so scared we couldn't even talk. Of course, the adults didn't believe us. We never went in the woods after that, and we left a couple of days later back to Florida. My brothers and I never talked about it again. It haunted me for a very long time. Now, I've seen a lot of werewolf movies, and the one that reminds me the most was the one in Silver Bullet. It gives me nightmares just to think that just to think of that movie. So that was when I became a believer. It scared me so bad. I told people, and he was glad we were safe, but mad we went out there alone. I told him what I saw, and he said there are all kinds of things in the woods that are not meant to be seen. You were lucky. Unfortunately, he died several years later. I certainly feel he had more info he never told me. Wow. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for sharing that with us. Now, guys, I asked Jeremy how he felt after these years, and just after the encounter as well, as a small child. And, obviously it was an extreme amount of distress, and some other descriptive details that he could give us also was what I was asking for. Well, this was his response, guys, and I think it's very, very interesting. Okay, DMT, the eyes looked almost human. I didn't remember if there was an eye shine or not, but the fur was black, jet black. I don't recall any muscular features. The legs were behind the tree till it stepped out. And when it did, I could not stop looking at its face. It just stared right through my soul. I was frozen with fear, a fear that I cannot explain. It was only when my brother said run when I snapped back into reality. And then, when it stepped from behind the tree, and I was looking at its eyes, its mouth had a sinister grin. And when it snapped its jaws, it almost felt like I felt it in my chest. It haunted me as a child, now, and also as a grown man. The thought of seeing that creature again scares the life out of me. DMT. This encounter took place in the summer of 2015 on US 53 North in Minnesota. The three men, Randy, Bob and Brandon, were on their way through Minnesota to meet up with another friend who lived in International Falls. The men had planned a fishing trip. It must have been about 1 AM and the road had very little traffic. A car would possibly pass every 15 minutes or so. The three were driving along, listening to the radio, when out of nowhere, a deer slammed into the side of the truck. As you can guess, this was quite odd, a deer hitting the vehicle. You see, it impacted the passenger side door. Usually a deer would jump over the bonnet on the front of the car, but this actually impacted the side, I can only guess in sheer panic. Immediately, Randy pulled over to the side of the road. He exited the truck. He then stated that he heard something big crashing through the woods. He jumped back into the truck, believing it was a bear. The other two men asked him, "What was that? What's going on?" Then they all saw the deer run off northbound in the middle of the highway. Then something stepped out of the woods. It walked on two legs in front of the truck. Brandon asked the other two men if that was a bear. Bob replied, "That does not look like any bear I have ever seen." Then, as the creature stepped foot onto the road, it stopped. The three men were in awe at what they were looking at, as the creature turned its head and looked down at them. Then Brandon yelled out, "That ain't no bear." It was so tall that through the headlights its head was shaded but huge. They could make out a snout. They could not make out much more detail at that time as it towered over the truck. But the eyes shined a golden yellow and the body was massive. The creature looked at the three of the men for a few seconds and then turned its head north, down the highway, and started running on its hind legs. How the hell can something that big run on two legs? As soon as it took off running and was a shadow on the road in the faint moonlight, Randy turned on his KC lights. It lit the road up like a Christmas tree, and as it did, the creature dropped to all fours and turned around. In the middle of the highway, the three men could now see the entire creature. It was now walking back towards the truck, and the three said it looked pissed, showing its teeth and everything. Randy said he was afraid to take off north and keep driving. He said he would have to pass right beside it within feet, so slamming the truck into reverse and punching the gas was really the only option. But would there be enough time to back up and do a U-turn before this thing was on top of them? Either way, they thought they were fucked. Randy kept the lights on the creature as he slowly backed up just to see if it would charge, and also to put some distance between them and it. Bob and Brandon kept yelling, "Go, go, go, go!" Randy yelled back, "Shut up, I am!" The other two men yelled back, "Not fast enough!" Randy put about 75 feet between the creature and the truck, then slammed it into drive and did a U-turn and took off back south the way they had just come. Then the truck shook as if it had been hit by something. Brandon, being in the back, looked out the rear window and yelled for Randy to speed up as it was right on their arse. Randy said he hit 50 miles an hour and asked Brandon if it was still behind us. His reply was at first yes, and then no. I can't see it anymore. The three drove for about 40 minutes until they found a motel. After not being able to sleep that night, the three returned home the next morning. I asked the three if they got a good look at the creature. All said yes at exactly the same time. At first, they all thought it was a bear, then a Sasquatch. But as all of the lights on the truck lit it up, it told a very different story. I asked the three men a variety of questions. These are some of my notes. Number 1. How close was the closest it was from the front of the truck? Their reply was about 5 feet. Question 2. About how tall on 2 legs would you approximate its height? They replied, that son of a bitch had to have been at least 9 feet. Question 3. Did you see the hands or paws? Their reply was, it had paws like a raccoon and the claws kind of turned inward, real long and black. Question 4. Did it have a muzzle? Their reply was, yes, with a mouth full of teeth. The teeth looked almost too big for its mouth. Question 5. What about the face? Their reply was, exact words, a fucking werewolf. Question 6. What about the body? Their reply was, matted dark brown fur. It's like it walked on the front part of its back, like tiptoed. The rest of its back foot was off the ground. It had a thick chest and little waist. A bear is simply round and plump. Question 7. What was the leg structure like? What was it shaped like? Reply was, like a horse's rear leg. Question 8. Did you see the ears? Their reply was, they were pointed like a dog or a wolf. Question 9. Eyes. What did the eyes look like? Their reply was, like a big cat, yellow gold in colour. Question 10. How fast would you estimate this thing was moving? Their reply was, a minimum of 45 miles an hour. Question 11. What was the shaking you experienced? Their reply, I believe this thing slapped the arse end of my truck. What else could it have been? The morning we left the motel, I got pulled over for a busted tail light. Question 12. What was your reaction when the deer hit the truck? Reply at first, stunned. I have never seen a deer run into the side of a vehicle. I have seen them jump over the hood of a car, but never into the side of a vehicle. Question 13. This was simply for Brandon. How long did you watch it in the back window? Brandon's reply was, I didn't take my eyes off it. It looked as if it was going to catch up to us. It was hauling ass. Question 14. Could you have been mistaken for this to be a Sasquatch? Their reply was, no, never seen a Bigfoot, but hell no. Question 15. Did you smell anything before it walked in front of the truck? Their reply, no, just that woodland smell. Question 16. Did you tell anyone what you had seen? Their reply was, a few people, but they simply laugh at us. And police, hell no. Bob said I did, and the police said, have a nice day, buddy, and smiled like I was crazy. These are most of the questions I asked. Bob didn't want to talk much. He just lit up a cigarette after cigarette and was visibly shaking. I was going to travel that stretch of highway, and I asked the men if they would like to come along. Their reply was, "We will show you on the map, but not going up there ever again." Wow. I hope you guys enjoyed that encounter. I know I sure did. It's a crazy, crazy story. You can imagine a dogman running up behind your truck as you try to make the getaway, and it simply bangs the truck as if it can go even faster. Please do let us know below in the comments. Please do like, please do share, and as ever folks, remember, be safe, not sorry. Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story needs no introduction and is simply entitled Dogman. I'm from Michigan. Where? I can't tell you, duh. But this is important. I'm from a small town which is scattered around my home state, and they really aren't uncommon. Ever since I was a kid and we moved away, I would spend the summer at my grandma's house. Now I'm fresh out of high school, and my gram had offered to have me come live up there for 6 months with her. My grandma is the toughest person I have ever met in my life. And when I say that, I mean it. She's skinny but strong and tall. She drinks beer and smokes like a sailor. She owns many guns and often goes out on her own hunting. Please bear with me. I know this is boring, but it's important. In Michigan, there is a myth of this thing called Dogman, kind of like a werewolf. It has the head of the dog and the body of a hairy man. Its eyes are said to either be blue or amber, and it walks on 2 feet, standing at a solid 7 feet tall. It shows up in 10-year cycles, sometimes with others, or sometimes alone. It's native to Michigan and stays there for some reason, and the stories and the legends have been around a long time. I remember my family joking around and telling me stories since, well, I was little. I think it's following me, and I know this sounds crazy. Maybe the fear has me hyped, but I've always been very open-minded when it comes to these things. It all started when my gram, as I call her, asked me if I wanted to go hunting with her. I have always been slightly scared of the woods, and they make me very uneasy, but knowing she was there made me feel safe. So I agreed, even though I didn't like the plan and really didn't intend on killing anything, because that really wasn't my style. So the next week we packed up and headed out to a deer blind that my family often used. It was very deep in the woods and took an hour or so to walk in just to get there. When we got up, we settled in and started watching. When you're in a deer blind, you're supposed to be quiet, but I got really bored, so I started having small whispered conversations with my gram. I wasn't really looking for deer because I honestly didn't care, but a day out with her seemed really nice. She suddenly looked over at me and she shushed me, and my heart skipped a little at the thought of a deer finally showing up. I'd never done this before, but when my grandma pulled down the wooden cover for the entrance and put a hand over my mouth, I just knew something was wrong. Even being 18 years old, I had never, ever seen her this scared. She is a tough old bastard, so when I saw the troubled expression on her face, I started to panic. My heart was beating so fast, I thought it was going to burst. After what seemed like days, she finally let go of me, motioned for me to stay quiet, and started packing up. She pulled the cover off, looked around, and we were on our way back. Our pace was way faster when we walked out there, and I constantly felt like looking behind my shoulder. I didn't know what we were afraid of, but I knew it was out there, and if she was scared, I sure as hell was. When we got home, I asked her what she saw, and she said that it was just simply a bear, which I knew was a lie. but I let it go, forcing myself to believe it, thinking I could lure myself into a false sense of security and just let it go. My Gram never lied to me. She was always very straight. So when she did, I knew for sure when she wasn't telling the truth. I failed to mention earlier, but she owns a beautiful dog named Foster. That is a mix between a wolf and a husky. He is the biggest sweetheart ever, and never liked to come inside, so he lives outside in a small stone doghouse that was across from the guest bedroom window. That night I heard something that sounded like a scream from out in the woods. It was bone-chilling and terrifying. I'd never heard anything like it in my life. I could hear Foster start to growl. I quickly dismissed it as an owl and thought about looking out the window to see what he was growling about, but to hell with that, I'm totally a scaredy cat. After a while, his growling stopped and I managed to go to sleep. And I shit you not, just like a horror movie cliche, he was gone the next morning. At night, we hook his collar onto a wire, which is attracted to a clothesline type thing that lets him run around but keeps him in a small radius. And it was fucking snapped, like he wanted to get away from something or something had gnawed it. And no, there weren't any scary big Dogman tracks outside my window, or anything for that matter. I asked if she wanted to go and see if we could find him, maybe rattle around his treat bag or something, and she quickly shut me down, saying he would be back and not to worry. But I was. How could she say that? The wire has never broken like that before, and she loves him to death, but thought she at least wants to know if he was alright. But much like the other instance, I quickly put it to the back of my mind with unease. Time skipped with me to a few days after that. Foster hadn't come back, but on the trees behind our house there was a huge gouge mark on some of the trees, which I pointed out to her, but she had dismissed it as a very large bear. The next few days, well, were pretty uneventful, except for the last night. I'm still shaking as I write this. I was laying down in hopes of drifting off to sleep when I heard it again. The scream that made me stop and freeze up. Terror seemed to course through the veins and seize me up, even making me hold my breath. The scream sounded again. Closer and closer again, where I swear it was in the woods right by our house. I thought of running to my grandmother, but I knew she would fake something and make me go back. I thought again about looking out the window, but I was so scared I don't think I could move my legs at that point. That's when the blinds went black. Since there are no cities around us, the light from the stars and the moon are pretty bright, and the window stays a faint blue. But the light was gone, and it was just black. I heard it. I fucking heard it. The guttural breathing that was on the other side of the window. I prayed that whatever it was wouldn't just smash the window and eat me up right there. I couldn't move a blink. I couldn't even cry. I knew that it knew I was in here. It scratched one time on the window. It was like nails on a chalkboard and let out that scream. It was so loud. It felt like I was right next to my ear. Before running away. I'm so shaky. I don't want to look and see what I know will be on that window. I'm afraid to sleep, afraid to face tomorrow night. Redditors, please help me. Any suggestions or insight would help me. I don't know what to do. I know it's not just a bear, they don't make that noise. I swear to God, nothing does. And I don't think it would be able to block out the whole window. Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a true, terrifying Dogman encounter, and it's a subscriber submitted encounter from a great friend of mine, Alicia. And I can't thank Alicia for being brave enough to come forward and share this story with myself. I have now found out I am the third person to ever hear this story, and now she's given us all the opportunity to hear the story on this channel. So thank you very, very much, Alicia, for being brave enough and honest enough to come forward and tell me of this horrific ordeal of yours. Also, guys, I'd just like to thank everybody in the last week that has, liked, shared, commented on all the videos that I've put out. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience, and I really can't thank you enough. It's literally our 8th week on YouTube, and already we are nearing 500 subscribers. I cannot believe it. So thank you guys very, very much. I won't rattle on any more, people. Let's get straight into tonight's Dogman encounter. Hi, DMT. To address my experience, I'm not sure I'm any good at translating these thoughts to paper, but I'll give you the weird ending, or basically the scariest part. You see, my grandma lived 2 towns over from where I live now, and I was at her house with my cousin for the whole week. She had a working farm, so the whole family would pitch in. Also, she lived in a trailer home. DMT, there was strange stuff going on 3 days leading up to the sighting. So, on the 3rd night, my grandma was in her room sleeping, and my cousin and I were on a pull-out couch in the living room. We kept hearing heavy breathing, but my grandma lived in the middle of the woods with one dirt road leading out and one in, so noises are common. So we just tried to ignore this. Then the clicking of nails on the wooden deck. I checked on my grandma's dog, and she was under the pull-out looking at me like, "Hide, you idiot." Then there were these banging noises that just erupted out of nowhere. I knew what it was, and it's not an uncommon sound. You see, it was crab apples falling from the tree that stood over the trailer we was in. But this time, it was like 50 apples hitting the roof at once. This is odd, as I'm sure you can imagine. They'd usually only fall here and there, and only one at a time. So I, because my cousin was a crybaby, moved the blinds just a little, and I saw what I can't believe, a huge furry creature. We don't have bears in our area, nor do we have anything really even close to that size here. So I just stood there, too terrified to move. It was grabbing a branch and shaking the tree when it moved over to pick up an apple. Now, I'm not 100% sure it was an apple, but it picked up something. I saw the thing stand up on its hind legs and take a few steps. It wasn't wobbling like dogs do when they stand on their back legs. I also noticed that the legs were bent backwards, just like a dog's. Luckily, it was dark in a living room where we were standing. There was a little light from the moon. Of course, a number 1 cliche, it was a full moon, and a huge light that was on the barn. It wasn't super bright, but it was bright enough to see this creature. Of course, my cousin looks and starts breathing really heavy, and says that we need to get Grandma. First off, I'm sure she heard the crab apples hit the roof. You see, it was a tin roof, so it was super loud. And my grandma was literally only 4'9" tall and maybe 90 pounds. There's not much I think she could do to protect us. With all the noise, she, my cousin, was making these Dogman's ears twitch, and it froze and suddenly turned its head so fast I wanted to run, scream, pee my pants and vomit all at the same time. It looked right at me, right into my eyes. The eyes were a yellowish red, and it started to turn its shoulders towards the way its head was facing and started to growl a very low and guttural, almost moaning sound. I swear, right then, time pretty much stopped. I had no effing idea what I was looking at or how to react. Then a car suddenly visible coming down the dirt road. It stopped, and quickly and I mean quickly, turned its head and body towards the deck railing, then dropped to all fours and jumped over the railing and was gone. I have no idea how long this all lasted. It seemed like a lifetime. The car coming up was my uncle. He was just stopping by to check on us on his way home from the Ford plant he worked at. When he pulled up and parked, I quickly leaned out the door a little to tell him to run into the house, and I just started bawling, which did in turn make him run, because he thought my grandma had died or was hurt. You see, she was 73 at the time. I was 13 and Amy, my cousin, was 14. My grandma had made her way to the living room by now and was very calmly asking what was wrong. I remember just staring off into space, not sure if I should tell them what I'd seen or not. My cousin would have backed me up, but she was way more freaked out than me, mainly because that's just how she is. Any little thing was a tragedy to her. She glimpsed it for maybe 5 seconds, but she didn't have the pleasure of having it stare into her soul. I chose to just let go of every emotion at that moment that I was feeling and holding back, because I was hoping they would think I was hurt or possibly sick and take me away from there. As luck would have it, it worked, but I demanded that he pull the truck right up to the deck and help my grandma. She wasn't really slow, but in my mind, anything but running full speed was too slow. We all got into the truck and I realised the dog was still in the trailer. I demanded we take the dog and they agreed, which made me start to think something was up. I knew all the animals were locked up in the barn and they had this awful mean ass bull that I honestly think would have kicked this thing's ass if it bothered the barn at all. So we were on our way to the hospital and my grandma and uncle were giving each other these looks that I started noticing. I wanted to say something, but I also just wanted as many miles between me and that thing as possible. We rode the rest of the way in complete silence, other than that weird sound someone makes when they are trying to stop crying. That almost hiccup sound. Right before the hospital is a park with a playground and equipment and sandboxes. Suddenly, my uncle did a quick turn into the park's parking lot. Amy and I were in those ridiculous extended cab seats that face each other with a dog on the floor between us. He put the truck in park and they both turned around. My grandma had streaks of dried tears on her face, which instantly made me cry again. My grandma and I were very close, and I had never seen her crying, so this hit me like a ton of bricks. I asked her, "What the hell is going on?" I never swore in front of my grandma, not even when I was in my 20s, and my grandma said, "What really happened back there?" So I just unloaded. When she looked at me in the eyes, I felt like she was giving me permission to just say everything I was afraid to. When I was done, my uncle started rubbing the top of his nose between his eyes and then yelled out, "God damn it!" And grandma started crying again and said, "I told you I was smelling it." You see, 3 days prior to all of this, weird things were occurring. The dog was staying right next to my grandma all of the time, which really wasn't normal for Mitzi. She would always, and I mean always, be running around in the fields chasing bugs and whatnot. There was a wretched smell of urine all over, it seemed. And that bull was pissed off, just on edge, would charge at anything. It was not normal. We did not go back there. We drove over to my house a few towns over. There were no woods or fields around for miles, which was a plus. My uncle that lived next to my grandma, and when I say next to, it's the country version next to, moved my grandma into his house and got the neighbours and family to come over and start digging and chopping and all that stuff, because the pasture and stuff had to be moved and everything was immediately rearranged. They put out bars on the windows and got 2 big dogs, not necessarily to attack anything, but just to warn of anything around. They refused to be scared away. And after I saw my grandma cry, I started getting angry. I continued to go to my grandma's for 5, maybe 6 more years when I needed help. I was never, ever the same, and I carried a shotgun at all times. I don't know really if it would have done anything, but it made me feel so much better. I've been shooting guns for years, and I wasn't a teenager just handed a gun with no idea how to use it. I never saw it or smelled it ever again. I left for college in 1999 and went to California and really did enjoy it. It made me feel more comfortable when I was alone, knowing I was in the middle of a big city with no woods. I worried terribly about my grandma, but she was a tough old cookie and incredibly stubborn. We were never told the story of why my grandma said, "I told you I smelled it again." I'm assuming there was another encounter. My uncle did say once it scared the kids and then it was over. I'm assuming they didn't know what they had seen or didn't believe it. My uncle and grandma were good, hard-working farmers. They weren't going to be scared off their land. After all that happened, I personally have never mentally been the same. You see, unless you have an experience like this, you will never understand how much it rattles you. Things you were told or things you believed in were now in question. So, DMT, that's it. And the reason I mentioned so many times that my grandma lived in a trailer is because about 6 weeks after it happened, we were getting some of grandma's stuff, and I walked out to the door and noticed the door frame. The trailer was 2 or 3 inches thick. At least it seemed that way. It was a 70s trailer. That is what separated myself from this thing. 3 inches. And headway I had made to get over this was gone in an instant. Fast forward 20 years and it still affects my life. I don't think it follows me around, and I don't think it has my scent, nothing like that. I've never seen it again and never want to. But I refuse to camp in a tent. I get inside the house before dark sets in. I always close the curtains and blinds, and I have 2 big Dogman pincers that, by nature, patrol our yard, and they are fiercely defensive of myself and kids. I no longer think about it every day like I used to. I sometimes hear these supposed encounters with the dogmen, and the ones I think are made up are the ones where people just see it and then that's it. No after effect, no mental stress. Trust me, I don't care who you are. When you witness something like this, it completely flips your world upside down. I honestly don't know how to explain it. But nowadays life is normal, with a few well-placed precautions. I wish I was wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong. This isn't something I enjoyed or feel special about. It was truly terrifying, and I can still sometimes see it in my mind. Wow. That's the encounter from our subscriber and friend Alicia. Thank you, Alicia. Truly terrifying experience, I'm sure. Through speaking with you, you know, it's something that I know has really stayed with you for 20 plus years. Guys, in the video, Alicia has taken time to visit the site of the encounter and take pictures of the actual trailer home where this encounter took place and the general area. Her family owned 400 acres of land, and only 50 acres of that was used for farming. So in hindsight, this dogman had free roam of 400 acres at least of forest land. There was a pond, so it had water source, plenty of wildlife, and hunting was not allowed on that land. So definitely a lot of mammals, large mammals, for it to feed on and sustain itself. Who knows? It could still be out there. I'm sure it is. I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Please do let me know in the comments below. Please do like, please do share. Once again, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry. Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is probably one of the most terrifying and horrendous ordeals and accounts of a Dogman encounter, plus many other strange and peculiar occurrences. I'm sure you guys will definitely agree. You may have heard part of this story already about a month back on Vic Cundiff's show Dogman Encounters Radio, episode 168, sent in by Rick. And I spoke to Rick shortly after that episode went out. Rick contacted me and explained there was a lot more to the story that he wanted to get across and felt had a definite connection to his Dogman encounter. Guys, this really sort of rocked my world in terms of what I believe in and what to keep my mind open in things, especially within the genre that we deal with. Please do let me know your thoughts down below. Of course, please do like and share. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's story. I'd like to entitle, I left Florida to get away from vampires and witches, only to run into a werewolf in Kentucky. Let's get straight into that. Hey DMT, I must apologise for the delay in my getting back to you about my encounter with the Dogman and the highest strangeness that preceded it. I gave an account of my encounter to Vic Cundiff on Dogman Encounters Radio, episode 168, but was not able to give a full account of the strange incidents that occurred prior to my actual Dogman encounter, and thought perhaps maybe you could convey them for me on your show. Anyone who wants to hear the actual encounter itself can do so by going onto YouTube and looking up Vic's show, Dogman Encounters. My name is Rick, and episode 168 will be my encounter, and it covers pretty much all of it. However, I honestly believe that my Dogman encounter is tied directly to incidents that occurred during and after the murder trial I was a juror for. I believe something supernatural was going on here. This case was pretty famous at the time and made national news as well. Shortly after it ended, a book about the case was written by the crime author Aphrodite Jones. Miss Jones also has a TV show on True TV, that used to be Court TV. The name of her book on the case was called The Embrace. Anyone curious about it can read her account of it and the trial. I was juror number 11, and I have truly come to regret it. You can find the book on Amazon.com. I'll let you be the judge as to whether curses or spells actually work. This, however, is my story, and I will swear on my family's lives that every single word of it is true. In late January of 1998, I was impanelled on a jury for a double murder trial that was to take place in my very small hometown in central Florida. My job at the time, a software engineer in a telecommunications company, required me to travel all over the world for months at a time, and I was not in my hometown when this double murder occurred. Therefore, I was unaware of it even happening. So, apparently what happened was this young high school boy named Rod, and I do not want to give his full name, moved down with his mother, a self-proclaimed witch, to my small hometown in central Florida from Owensboro, Kentucky. Once enrolled in a local high school, Rod began to recruit some of the local teens from it into a vampire cult he had begun to take part of when he was in high school student in Kentucky. There, in Kentucky, he was embraced by the group's leader, a young man who went by the vampire name of Jaden. In this new local group, Rod was considered the leader. These teens would meet in a local cemetery where they would conduct an initiation of the newest members. The initiations consisted of slicing one another's arms and drinking one another's blood. The group called this initiation the Embrace. Over time, Rod recruited several local teens into his group and also associated the group with several other local groups that dabbled in dark arts such as witches and Satan worshippers. These groups would often meet together on Friday nights and read from the Necronomicon, a book of unholy arts, witchcraft and spells. Rod's own mother was involved with combined meetings, as well as these meetings included adults as well as the local teens. Allegedly, during these combined meetings, Satan worship was practiced, spells were cast, and all manner of sexual perversion and promiscuity occurred as well. This would include incest, group sex, bestiality, and statutory rape. Enter into this situation a very young and impressionable little girl that, like many confused young teens, was detached from her parents and sadly was not happy at home. She was always feeling unappreciated and unloved and had little communication with them. The young girl, named Heather, made several attempts to run away from home only to be subsequently caught and brought back. There she would face the usual teenager's punishments of being grounded and several privileges taken away. This angered Rod since he no longer considered Heather as belonging to her parents, but belonging to him. This was a very deep-seated delusion with this young man. He truly felt that he now owned and controlled this young girl. When her parents decided that Heather was no longer allowed to have any contact at all with Rod, he grew even more angry and desperate. At first, Rod cast spells to harm the parents, but local white witches found out and got angered by it. So, Rod decided that he would try a different method of getting Heather away from her parents' control. He then decided he would just go and take her. Rod gathered his vampire group together and hatched a plan to go take Heather from her parents' home, as well as steal their vehicle and money. The group would then drive the parents' vehicle out west to one of America's largest national forests. It is believed Yellowstone, where they would begin a commune of sorts and live off the land undetected by law enforcement or any outside people. On the night of the murders, most of the children involved with the plan got cold feet and backed out, deciding not to go along with Rod. In the end, only 5 would go along. Only one other member, named Scott, would actually participate in the actual murders. The other participants were Heather and 2 other local teen girls. This lack of support from his followers further angered Rod even more. In order to get Heather away from her parents, Rod and Scott went to her home around 10 p.m. on a Friday night. Heather had an older sister, a senior at the same high school, who had just that day received the good news that she had been accepted to a Florida State University for the following fall term. The older sister was out with friends celebrating the news of her college acceptance. How extremely fortunate for her. Heather, who would have been grounded for weeks, had finally been allowed to spend the night with a friend family knew and trusted. It was her birthday, and letting Heather stay the night was a favour from the parents for her. She would later that night sneak away from her friend's home to join Rod and the rest. This left the parents alone in their home when Rod and Scott approached it on that fateful Friday night. The two stood outside the home for a while, contemplating what they were about to do. Scott was having second thoughts. Rod grew more angry. He quickly admonished Scott and assured him he had it all planned out. Rod held in his hand a stick about 2 feet long, painted black with a black tape grip. This would be his weapon of choice. Looking around the home for an easy place to enter, Rod first tried the window to Heather's room. It was locked. The duo then went around to the other side of the home, where they found the side door into the garage to be unlocked. This gave the entrance into the garage. Halfway home, Rob muttered. As the two would-be murderers entered the garage, they began to look around. There, on a small workbench, lay something that caught Rod's eye and made him smile. Perfect, he whispered intensely as he reached over and picked up a 1.5 foot long solid steel crowbar-type tool, known to construction workers as a cat claw. He grasped the cat claw firmly and handed the stick he had been holding to Scott for his use. The two then quietly made their way to the door that led into the home, and Rod began to slowly turn the knob. It was not locked. They could hear a TV on the other side. The sounds of a local newscaster's voice were on it. It must have been 11 p.m, thought Rod. "We'd better hurry," he whispered to Scott. As he turned the knob fully, Rod began to slowly open the door. Inside, he could see the side of the sofa. A large figure was laying on it in the family's living room. From where they were, the two of them could see that no one else was in the living room except the figure on the sofa. So, they entered slowly and carefully. Quietly, the two approached the sofa, where they could now tell the figure of Heather's father was lying there fast asleep. Rod casually walked over next to the sleeping man, with the TV drowning out any noise he might have made. Scott then smiled and began to giggle under his breath as Rod danced like it was some kind of faintly silly Indian rain dance next to the sleeping man on the sofa. Scott then walked to the end of the sofa where the man's head lay. Rod had stopped his dancing now. They both leered at this man, who was the cause of all their grief. This sleeping man who had denied Rod his right. He had denied Rod what was his. Heather no longer belonged to this man. Heather belonged to him. Scott looked at the man with disdain. This man who had angered his leader so much seemed harmless while he slept. This man who, in a moment, would no longer sleep, no longer dream, no longer smile, laugh, talk, or anger his master. This sleeping man, who soon would no longer breathe, made him sick. Rod raised the cat claw above his head and came down quickly with it, then stopped, just inches above the sleeping man's head. He feigned another blow, then another, and another, till he finally looked Scott in his eyes, with the blood boiling in his own, and Rod yelled into almost scream-like, "Fuck it!" With that, Rod had raised the cat claw again high into the air above the head and came down with a bone-crunching blow right into the middle forehead of Heather's father. The first blow shocked Scott into reality. Rod was committing murder and he was part of it. Rob continued to land bone-crunching blow after bone-crunching blow, and the blood flew everywhere. Scott decided he better act too, and Rod would be angry, so he raised the wooden baton he held and came down on the man's skull as well. The feel of the wood hitting the mashed-in goo that was now this man's face was almost sickening to Scott, but Rod didn't seem to care. He continued to pummel the man's skull, while Scott watched a tooth go flying across the room. Both young men laughed at the sight, and it seemed to bring Rod back out of whatever demonic spell had taken over his mind in the last few seconds. They looked down at this matted, smashed-up skull that had once been a man's face. They stared at the blood and brain matter splattered on the sofa and surrounding walls. As the duo surveyed their handiwork, Rod exclaimed, "Holy shit, that dude is mincemeat." With that, the two of them laughed evilly. Rod then looked at Scott more businesslike and said, "Find the car keys and I'll get his wallet." As Rod procured the now very dead man's wallet, Scott ventured towards the kitchen, looking for a key hook where Heather told him to find the keys to her parents' Ford Explorer. Just before reaching the doorway to the kitchen, Scott froze. Rod, having grabbed the wallet, came to his side. "What is it?" he asked. "Someone is coming from the kitchen," Scott whispered. Rod eased to the doorway by the kitchen with the cat claw in hand. he could hear someone pouring a cup of coffee and mixing it up. Sugar, then cream. It was Heather's mum, fresh from her nightly shower. Heather's mum had actually been her biggest complaint. Her father was working all the time, so her mum was the one who would usually be home and refused to allow her to see or speak to Rod. For that, she must pay, thought Rod. The anger and the adrenaline poured into his veins and his eyes burned with hatred. It felt good. He turned around and looked at Scott and motioned around the corner to the kitchen. With that, Rod eased around the corner too. There, he could see, standing in front of him, the back of a woman in a light blue terry cloth bathrobe with wet hair dangling down her back. She was mixing a cup of coffee on the counter as he and Scott slowly crept up behind her. When the two killers were about 3 feet away from Heather's mum, she turned around and an instant horror-filled look covered her face at the sight of the two black-cloaked teenage boys in front of her. Their faces were indeed covered in blood. Fear gripped her instantly as she recognized them both. "Get out!" she screamed at Rod as she threw the hot cup of coffee into his face and turned to run away. Rod yelled in pain as the hot coffee burned his eyes, and he reached out and grabbed at the blue terrycloth bathrobe. The screaming woman ripped free from the bathrobe as her naked body flashed across the kitchen. Scott grabbed her wet hair as Rod regained his senses. Together, the two of them overpowered the naked woman and threw her to the floor, face down. They sat atop of her body and began to beat her in the back of the skull with their instruments of murder. The screaming silenced as urine poured from between the naked woman's legs. Blow after blow crushed in the back of the naked woman's skull, while blood and brain matter went flying everywhere. "This bitch will never throw a coffee on me again," thought Rod angrily. His fury was even more intense than before. This time he beat his victim so badly he dislodged her brain from the brainstem and caused it to spin sideways in her skull. Finally, Rod had enough. He stood up along with Scott, who had held the naked woman to the floor. They marvelled at their handiwork lying naked on the floor in a pool of her own blood and brain matter. "Nice body for an old chick," observed Rod. With that, and using the toe of his black combat boot, he began to try and turn the dead woman's body over, so Scott reached down and grabbed a lifeless arm to help. The two pulled the naked woman's body over and had a good look. With a disgusting half grin and snicker, Scott said, "Not bad at all." With that vile comment, the two killers laughed aloud and resumed their look for the truck keys. Upon locating the wall hook, they found the keys Heather had told them about. The killers then surveyed the final scene. "Whoa, what a mess!" exclaimed Rod. Having completed the task at hand, the killers quickly grabbed Mum's purse and headed into the garage. They opened the door and climbed into the truck, Rod driving back out slowly. "Mission accomplished," he said to Scott. They then stopped outside to use the water hose to wash the blood off of everything they could see it on. When the two of them felt they were clean enough, they hopped back into the truck and drove away from this house of horrors that they had created. Half an hour later, Heather's older sister would return home. Still glowing from her acceptance party, she figured she would sit up with Mum and watch The Tonight Show while Dad snored away on the sofa like he always did. Upon entering the home, she could see that Dad was on the sofa, but Mum wasn't in the room. As she headed to the kitchen, something caught her eye that sent chills down her spine. A bloody footprint. This is the recount given by several witnesses to a murder trial that I was juror for. Juror number 11 specifically. The crimes were committed in 1996 and the trial took place in early 1998. It was very shortly after this trial that I had a horrifying Dogman encounter. I shared the actual Dogman encounter on Vic Condiff's show, episode 168, a few weeks ago, and even touched on the murder trial. I was on that preceded it, I had many requests to give more details on the case and how it led up to my encounter. As I said on Vic's show, after witnessing the brutality and evilness of these murders, I needed some time to get away. I wound up going on a fishing trip in the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky. A trip I would come to regret for the rest of my life. During this trial, I bore witness to some extremely troubling testimonies from numerous teenage children from our local high school, as well as the murderer's mother. These little girls, who were into witchcraft, Satan worship, ritual sex and blood sacrifices, casting spells from the Necronomicon book of witchcraft, and actual blood drinking, saddened me. This was extremely disturbing and shocking to me to find out it was going on in my very small hometown which I grew up in. I never in a million years suspected this to be going on here. The jury was subjected to this horrible testimony, videos and pictures to go along with it for 3 weeks, all while being glared at with the most evil stare by Rod's mother, herself a proclaimed witch. After the trial ended and we delivered a guilty verdict, and because we saw Rod as just as big a threat to fellow prisoners as innocent people on the outside, the verdict we handed down came with a unanimous death sentence recommendation. It was later commuted to a life in prison by our state Supreme Court on the grounds he was too young at the time he committed the murders to be put to death. But as the sentence was handed down, his mother yelled a curse or spell of some sort in Latin at the jury, prosecutor and the judge. I know it sounds like something straight from the Twilight Zone, and I do not know if the curse had anything to do with my encounter or not. But I do find it very coincidental that my encounter was in Kentucky, where this young man and his mother came from. I know the judge also passed away unexpectedly very soon after, and the state attorney that prosecuted him was arrested himself and resigned in disgrace. As for my fellow jurors, I cannot say, because we did not stay in touch. For me, I can say that after my encounter, I was almost killed by a fallen soda machine shortly afterwards, and was forced to stop working and semi-retire. The machine falling on me broke my back in 2 places and crushed my right side ribs and both of my hips, which had to be replaced. It collapsed 1 lung and fractured my pelvis in 3 places. I spent 6 months in bed, followed by 2 years in a wheelchair and another 5 years with a walker and crutches, learning to walk again. Shortly after I was able to walk well enough to get around on my own, I had a massive heart attack and was rushed in for emergency quadruple bypass surgery, all before my 50th birthday. So, I don't know if her curse or spell had any effect or not. I'll let you people decide. I do know this: a fiction writer could not come up with a story this good, yet every single word I have just told you is 100% true, and I would swear on the lives of my family that it is. The trial for Rod, the leader of the vampire cult, ended in mid-February. For many days afterward, I continued to think about the horrible things I had witnessed during the trial. Seeing such graphic and awful acts in detail and realising that this was going on in my hometown, I became very, very depressed and sad. To know that young children had been involved in witchcraft, Satan worship and cold-blooded murder in this little town that I had grown up in and loved was very hard for me to believe. I didn't think much about what the young man's mother had said to us all, since I didn't understand her and didn't believe in supernatural things like curses, spells or hexes anyway. Right around that time, my aunt, who was my mother's youngest sister, was down from her home in Lexington, Kentucky, along with her husband, who was my uncle, visiting our family. My uncle had been a long-time companion to my father, and I went hunting and fishing. My uncle had been a long-time companion to my father, and when I went hunting and fishing also. From the time I was a small child, I had always been an avid outdoorsman, hunting, fishing, hiking and camping, and just generally exploring out in the woods near my home in central Florida. I spent about half of my childhood in the woods, so I had come to know them extremely well. My uncle had accompanied my father and I on many hunting and fishing trips in the woods, so when he invited me to accompany him on a fishing trip he had planned for the second week of March, I jumped at the invitation. My wife and I both thought it would be a great way to get away from home and relax and enjoy nature while just forgetting all about that horrible trial and everything I had seen and heard. And since I had plenty of vacation time, getting the time off to go was no problem at all. So, when they got ready to head home a couple of weeks later, I packed up all my gear and a couple of guns and kissed my wife goodbye. We left Central Florida early on Saturday morning, with me following their truck up in my car. We headed first to his home in Lexington, so he could pack his fishing gear and all of his camping supplies, as well as his own firearms. We weren't doing any hunting, but we brought the guns along with us because he said there were bear in the area we were going to, and it was better to be safe than sorry. We loaded the guns and all of our camping and fishing gear into his truck and prepared to leave for the Daniel Boone National Forest in southeast Kentucky the next morning. We woke the next day in no hurry, taking our time to be sure we had everything we needed for a full week out in the forest, because where we were going to be was way too far out in the middle of nowhere to go back to a store for supplies. We did a little last minute shopping and then said goodbye to my aunt as we both jumped into his truck for the long drive out into the Daniel Boone National Forest. The place we were headed to was a very large tension power line easement that cut through the very dense forest of southern Kentucky. We were planning on camping on a bluff that overlooked the banks of the Rockcastle River, about 2 miles north of where it joins up with the Cumberland River, which is a very large river that comes down from the Appalachian Mountains and snakes through southern Kentucky. Our plan was to set up camp atop the bluff there that was some 30 feet above the banks of the Rockcastle and carry our gear down to the river via a trail that wound down from above to the shoreline. The Rockcastle River is very popular for whitewater kayaking. My uncle's family liked to get out on the river in early spring just after the melt started and before the kayakers had a chance to crowd the waterways. The smallmouth bass are supposed to be really good at that time of year as well, so it seemed like the perfect fishing opportunity for me to just fish, camp and enjoy nature. By the time we arrived at our spot on the bluff there, it was dark, so we decided just to sleep in the truck till the sun came up, then get our gear out and head down the trail to the shoreline to fish. We figured we could set up the tent later in the morning after everything was dry from the morning dew. This was a fortunate idea for us. We awoke early the next morning and got ready to head down to the shoreline. When I stepped out of the truck, I realized it was still very cold in Kentucky in early March, unlike Florida where spring break was well underway at the beaches for the college kids. There was no wind to speak of, but still I found it very odd, that even though the sun was starting to rise, there was no sound coming from the forest. No birds chirping or bugs buzzing about. Nothing. The woods around us were as silent as a church prayer group. All I could hear was the water moving in the river down below. A buzz in the power lines and my uncle grabbing his gear from the back of the truck. I joined in and grabbed my fishing gear and my guns as well as a collapsible chair and cooler. As far as firepower, we both felt what we had was more than sufficient. I carried a 30-06 rifle with a 4x14 scope and a 357 Magnum sidearm. My uncle carried a 12-gauge shotgun with 0.00 buckshot and a 4.4 Magnum sidearm. A hand cannon is what I call it. So, all the time I was getting my stuff from the truck, I kept having this feeling of being watched. After 8 years in the army, with the 82nd Airborne, and after 3 tours of combat, I had begun to develop a third eye in the back of my head that alerted me to danger. I should have listened, but I shook off the feeling of being watched, and since we were loaded for bear, my uncle and I set off down the trail toward the shoreline of the rock castle. When we arrived on the shore, I sat down the cooler and my fishing gear and set up my folding chair. He set his chair next to mine with a bait bucket and then walked around behind me. It was at that moment I heard the first limb break. We both froze as we began to hear the sound of something in the woodline behind us. We were sitting on the shoreline with the bluff and trail down. It's situated behind us just a bit to our right. This is where the power lines crossed over the rock castle. We didn't want to sit under those buzzing power lines, so we set our chairs just a few yards down shore south. The noises coming from the woodline were further south of us, another 40 or 50 yards or so. Whatever was making the noise sounded big, and worse yet, it sounded bipedal. I sat completely motionless with my fishing rod in hand and rifle leaning next to me. I could not see my uncle at this time because he was still behind me. He too was standing still as a statue, not saying a word. We listened for what seemed like several minutes, but was more like a few seconds, to the sound of something breaking limbs, big limbs, and crunching in the underbrush, when all of a sudden this enormously huge and petrifying beast sprang out of the tree line and onto the shore about 40 yards south of where we had started fishing. It looked like a werewolf. This thing was jet black from head to toe, with a massive sized head and 2 glaring yellow eyes. It had long pointed ears on top of its head, with little tufts of fur on top, like a bobcat has. The snout was long, but also full and wide, and it had a mouth full of massive teeth that were all sharp and pointed, not just the canines. It had a thick neck that came down to what looked like either longer hair on its back and shoulders, or it was raised up. The shoulders were pronounced cannibal-type shoulders that went into very muscular arms. These were extremely long compared to a human. The arms continued down to what looked like oversized raccoon hands with claws on each and every finger that had to be over an inch long. Its torso looked human and had incredible muscular definition like a bodybuilder has. It then narrowed a bit at the waist and continued down into its legs, which has some very, very muscular thighs and human-like knees. The legs then went down to hocks, or the backward bent legs of a dog or wolf, and then ended at huge-sized dog-type feet. I was completely frozen in place. I just sat there in stunned silence as I tried to wrap my mind around what I was seeing. At first, I thought it was a bear, but quickly ruled that out. I had a million things going through my mind at once. What the hell was this thing? Where the hell did it come from? And how the hell can I get away from it? Were some of my thoughts. At that moment, I caught a whiff of the thing, and oh my God, did it stink. It had the most rancid smell I have ever smelled of an animal. It smelled like 3-day-old roadkill that had been rotting in a hot Florida sun. Just an unbelievably nauseating stink to it. I thought about my family, my wife, my son who would never see me again. I knew we were dead men. It then leaned over and laid its ears back on its head and squinted its eyes like it was about to pounce. Then it growled. This growl was so sinister and so pronounced it literally vibrated my entire body all the way down to my soul. It was horrifying. I nearly peed my pants. Right at that moment I heard an incredibly loud boom over my head that shook me free from my frozen state of fear that I was in. My uncle, who was still standing right behind me, had pulled out his .44 Magnum pistol and fired it over the top of that thing's head. When he did that, I almost pissed myself again, and the beast did a backwards somersault into the woodline and tore out of sight in a flash. We both immediately grabbed our poles and guns and hauled ass up the trail of the bluff. Hands over feet, we dug and scraped and scrambled our way up the trail towards the truck, dirt flying and dust in our faces, while we were praying aloud for God to protect us. Once we reached the truck, we opened the doors and just threw our guns in the back seat. My uncle started the truck and took off foot to the floor. As soon as we took off, that creature burst out the wood line on the other side of the power lines. It gave chase as we flew down the 2-rut maintenance road by the power lines, and it stayed right on our bumper. This thing was so big on all fours, its head was over the bed of the truck, and I could see it snarling. It stayed with us till we made it to a paved road, and my uncle took off. By this time, I was getting physically ill and was about to throw up. This thing stayed with that truck till we reached every bit of 60 miles per hour. It then broke off its chase and darted back into the woods. I rolled down my window, stuck my head out and vomited right there. I threw up a couple more times before we got out of the heavily wooded area. All the way back home, my uncle and I could not even talk about what we had just seen. We just sat and rode in stunned silence. When we pulled into the driveway at his home in Lexington, I grabbed all my belongings, tossed them into my car and left right away for Florida. I drove non-stop all the way home. I only stopped for gas. As I drove home, I went over it in my mind again and again. What the hell had we seen out there? And where the hell did it come from? I also thought about the irony of how I left Florida to get away from vampires and witches, only to run into a werewolf in Kentucky. It was only much later that it occurred to me that the young man I had been a juror for was from Kentucky, and what his mother had said to us as she left the courtroom following our verdict. Was it a curse? I don't know. Is that the reason for my misfortunes? I don't know the answer to that either. It all seems very, very coincidental to me. But I'll let you decide. Do you believe in curses, spells, or hexes? Thank you for listening. Rick. Wow. Thank you so much, Rick, for sharing that with us and trusting me with that horrendous experience of yours, but nonetheless an absolutely incredible story. Guys, please do let us know down below what you thought in the comments. Please do like and share. And remember, guys, if you're going on a fishing trip, best to check the location history first, because you never know what might be lurking in the shadows. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.